So, may as well just rename this series. Pretty much Esau's showing his horns and he's ready to put hands on you, Israelites. Of course, I'll just say response video to it, because, right, you know, I make a response because the video was already put up, right? Well, this is part 2. Shalom. First and foremost, like to give all praise to Yahweh, Ba'Hashem, Yahweh Shai, Ba'Hashem, Rakah Kadash. Double honors, the elders and apostles of Great Millstone, where I teach this truth and sincerity. And shout out to Akims out there in the four corners of the earth who claim this truth. Rakah the Yahweh, Rakah the Yahweh Shai, Ba'Hashem, Rakah Kadash, Brakatam. So, I came across this guy, of course, from Apostle Tahar, who subscribed to his channel, and I did the same thing. Rethinking the dollar, and he's going into it. The 40-year-old Saudi oil record that just broke, meaning that, okay, it's not really worth anything anymore because there's nowhere to sell the oil to with both straits closed, and the fact that, you know, they're pretty much destroyed, you know. So we'll get into this a little bit. Close that out.
Our lives today and our future. And clearly something's changing with the petrodollar. So we'll talk about that a lot more. But for those who are plugged in, appreciate you blessed with your time and presence. Sorry about the tardiness, but you know, always trying to maneuver and improve things for you guys on the back end. So grab a couple extra sound bites that add up to the story that I'm going to connect to let you know what happened. So we're going to talk about that a lot more. So let me make sure I'm flowing on all cylinders. So feel free to share thoughts, ideas, and suggestions in the chat. And if we have any first-time viewers, this is where you get a chance to let me know where you're watching from.
All right, let me
and by do that, in the comment section,
a little bit here.
And if someone says all municipal bonds will go down soon, no doubt. Anything denominated in a USD term is running the risk right now of becoming a non-performing liability.
There it is.
Once again, interest rates are much lower than they need to be in order to really, I guess, try to, as Jerome Powell used to say, to conduct a soft landing, whatever that means. But okay, appreciate everybody blessed with your presence. Let me just move right along. I want to get things going. So let's start with some primary headlines that caught my attention to start this off. And so also, you know, congratulations for those that are patiently waiting and anticipating. We've had some interesting developments when it comes to gold and silver, which I think is more so related to the uncertainty in the global economy and in our local domestic issues that we have here. And so with Clarity Act being postponed, it looks like until after recess, clearly gold and silver cares nothing about clarity because we all know what is real, true, tried, and tested. But what's different about this is we almost touched $65 an ounce. And of course, look at gold. Gold is still trending upward overall to 43. And so we're well beyond those previous ceilings that were set. And so whenever a ceiling is, I guess, removed or placed up higher, it's an indication that something's happening behind the scenes. And of course, we won't hear about it until after the fact. But nevertheless, that's why I always say possession over price any day, because it's null and void for those who know what's really going down. But I do want to comment real quick on the ceiling that I talked about over the last several videos, and it has to do with what we're seeing here. So literally, it has been 30 days to the actual minute almost, where we haven't had a $60+ market close in 30 days. And so literally to see, you know, right now we're seeing, as you can see on the screen here, we're seeing 63.32. That is something to not frown upon because it was literally 30 days of 5 rejections. So literally, you got to go back to July 7th at this time when we were above 60 comfortably, and it was 61.90. And so we've had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 failed attempts at recovering above 60. So clearly, the suppression and futures dumping was so strong that it worked for 30 days. Now we have to wait and see what happens over the next 30 days, heading into September. Now that Congress is closed, there's no more political jawboning that will take place. So it's free game on this administration needing to come up with some narrative surrounding the deal, which we heard nothing about the last, 48 hours. It's supposed to be done by now if they were so eager to make a deal. So that's going to be another issue in of itself. But I digress. This is a interesting development here. So let's see if we can finish this week above 63. And then over the weekend, there's going to be more noise to take us into Monday. And either go down or come up. But either way it go, hopefully the last 30 days, you've taken an opportunity to acquire what you believe is true, try to test. Okay, cool. Enough of that. That's kind of boring. Okay, so this is the next story of subject matter. Jobs data, dense, rate hike bet. So it says gold hit 7-week high as weak U.S. jobs data dense rate hike bets. And so if jobs is an issue, that puts more pressure on the Fed to have to consider, like, okay, are we concerned with inflation, or is our jobs, or, you know, where's our mandate coming to all this? And so ultimately speaking, more of a pause for longer because they don't want to admit outright, you know, that they are well behind the curve. So I don't expect some type of hike in September. No, chalk it up, and we'll just chug along. Things will take place. In the meantime, interest rates will remain, because once they move next, whether up or down, it's going to be an ongoing thing. So, okay, but just to give you some data here. So I think yesterday somebody asked about the jobs data. I'm like, it doesn't matter. Good news is bad news, bad news is good news. They're all fake. And so it's the great revision that I pay attention to. And of course, they've been revising down ever since Joe Biden. I bet you Trump won't say that. But anyway, it says U.S. job July non-farm payroll is negative 23,000 versus an expected 80,000 plus. So that's 100,000 job difference. That gap is so large, it doesn't make sense. Outside of the fact that all the jobs numbers have been suspect for quite some time now. Then it says UA rate futures cuts, chances of September rate hike. Oh, you think? Silver, platinum, and palladium also head for weekly gains. Wow. Would you look at that? Reuters is telling us that silver, platinum, and palladium is doing their thing. Okay. Now, you might have come here for something a little bit different. And so this story here that I'm about to transition to now is centered around the petrodollar, because this is front and center right now. And so outside of the Strait of Hormuz being the primary choke point for the flowing of oil from that region, Iran clearly is winning that narrative and that conflict, because things aren't flowing westward priced in dollars. It's obvious. Go check the graphs. You'll see tankers are flowing. They're flowing east. They're flowing everywhere else except the U.S. And there's no greater proof than the fact that Saudi Arabia, the U.S.'s numero uno oil energy partner in the Middle East, sent 0 barrels for the first time in 40 years. Now you can ask yourself a question. If you're Saudis and you're not sending oil to your biggest partner, your ally, that means you're making $0 on the oil that did not get shipped. And so if you're not sending it that way, you're either not making money and need to close down shop, or you're sending it somewhere else. And more than likely, you're no longer needing to force people to pay you in dollars. And so it's this type of activity here that then gives a greater understanding as to why Venezuela is so important, and why Israel's desire to become a oil hub is important as well. So we're waiting to the reshuffling of the petrodollar system. It will not come to an end. This instrument here will not go null and void overnight. It's just the world will require payment and other things. Hence the idea of the U.S. needing to lie to the American public more, and there's going to be more pressure that's going to be placed on our allies to not outright cut their acceptance of dollars from their finances. Okay, so what am I talking about? This story here, man. This is a story like no other. And then I'm going to let you know my thoughts on it, and we'll go from there. So here is a story of the day that deserves front and cover type of attention, because this is a unprecedented action in the midst of what is already considered to be a very volatile, questionable environment centered around U.S. dollar hegemony. And so let me just give you the nuts and bolts. It says Saudi crude oil shipments to U.S. plunged to 0. Decline followed disruptions to Persian Gulf oil flows tied to the U.S.-Iran war. And so to 0. We've never seen the word 0 associated with Saudi Arabia since 1985 for an entire month. And so what's different from then to now is the fact is this will not just be a single month, in my opinion. This is going to be a more long, drawn-out process, because Iran is not backing down. And unless the U.S. go into Iran and physically get involved with boots on the ground, it's going to be more job only from this administration and no real action coming from it. So therefore, Saudi Arabia is like, okay, we're not making money from you. Do we really need to just, be reliant upon you and your currency? No. And the reason I say that is because obviously Saudi Arabia knows that something's coming now, that Saudi Arabia will no longer be forced to ship because they can't ship, and they won't be shipping if they do in dollars and solely. And so no wonder they are now establishing a mega trilateral defensive agreement with their other Middle East neighbors.
AKA BRICS.
That's a lot said at once, but it's all centered around the dollar. And so it says U.S. Saudi Arabian oil dropped to 0 July, the first time that has happened for the entire month since 1985, according to preliminary government data. It says Saudi oil exports have been disrupted for months as U.S.-Iran conflict all but shut down Persian Gulf flows. And it says last month the U.S. found shipments of Kingdom's crude ground to a halt, according to the Department of Energy, as of August 5th. It says it's a significant decline, given that the U.S. refiners were buying more than 800,000 barrels of Saudi oil a day earlier this year. So think about that. 800,000 barrels were purchased using our liabilities per day is down to 0. That's a shock of all shocks. And so let me give you a visual as to what that looks like. And so here on the screen, you can see that article summarized in a more picturesque form. And so Saudi oil imports is 0. So literally, let me just give you this graph here. So this is kind of what it looks like. And so the 4-week average of U.S. imports of Saudi oil was significantly high, as it said here, up to 800,000 a day. So imagine things started to pick up a little bit after oil started to flow based upon some narratives. It's open, it's closed, it's open, it's closed. But literally, we're waiting to see the drop off completely, where we get to a month where it says 0. That right there is not just say something to smile about. And what has happened beyond that, at the same time oil stopped flowing to us from the Middle East, priced in the Brent USD price market, Venezuela came online. And so this is the reason why.
And here's why we said that the petrodollar is dead. Once Saudi became a BRICS member, there's a preemptive to this.
The Venezuelan people and the regime and this and that, whatever. And we heard that about Maduro. Maduro been in cuffs supposedly for the last 8 months, but more likely he's probably on an island somewhere, sold his country out, got a good payday. And so the U.S. now is in charge of Venezuelan oil at the same time. So either the U.S. knew that oil was going to be disrupted, or they needed cover for the reason why oil would no longer flow this way freely, and the world would not be forced to, going eastward, solely have to accept dollars. Because the U.S. can't bully every single nation in the Middle East and around entirely, because they just we don't have the manpower, I think, to enforce our commands, saying that you must take the dollar or else we're gonna sanction you, or we're gonna bomb you, or we're gonna replace you.
Yeah, right. Like so Iraq, like they did to Iraq.
These are all signs of how the dollar structure is slowly but surely comes to an end. And what makes this different is that it's happening at a time where the U.S. can't afford to have this type of outright admission from the world stage that the petrodollar system is no longer de facto. That's the point. It's no longer just status quo when it comes to being forced to do business in U.S. liabilities. And so here's a video that just gives more insight as to why Venezuela was so important, and why Venezuela is now supplying us, why Venezuela is now our biggest supplier of oil outside of what we got here. So let's listen to this real quick.
Dollar dominance is essential, and everything President Trump is doing here is, if you look, the new Venezuela is invoicing dollars that are coming back onto the dollar system. They've been sanctioned; they were not allowed to translate or to.
Okay, so let me narrate that. This is Scott Bessent last month, as it says here, CNBC, talking about how great the economy we have because now we have a new source of oil. And so he says the new Venezuela is coming back on the dollar system, i.e., they're now being forced to do everything through the dollar, reinforcing what is just being lost coming from the Middle East, i.e., through Saudi Arabia, through Iran, all that stuff. And so listen, so this is more of a reason why the U.S. does what it does when it comes to our dollar.
Transacted dollars, and now the dollar's going to be the centerpiece of their trade.
The dollar's going to be the centerpiece of their trade, or you mean of our trade, because we're the ones overseeing it by putting a female puppet president there as like the leadership. Okay.
We're selling discounted oil to China and not getting.
They were selling discounted oil to China and not having to receive dollars in payment.
Dollars. We're seeing in the Iranian negotiations, the Iranians will be invoicing in dollars.
So that's where he is outright, mistaken, or wants to be mistaken. They're working with Iran to make sure that Iran is invoicing, will start invoicing their oil in dollars, which means that they are not already doing that, which is why the U.S. is literally so pressed to make sure that Iran doesn't develop a nuclear weapon. Right. They haven't been invoicing in USD for quite some time, not only because of sanctions, but again, why would a nation who's under extreme sanctions for so many years still cooperate with their oppressors by accepting that their oppressor's currency when they got their own currency and other things? Okay.
Everything we are doing is pushing the dollar back. It's never left as the centerpiece for the global currency system, but we're reinforcing it.
Everything we're doing is to push, but it hasn't left. We're reinforcing the dollar. Okay, really.
Anticipate when the Russia-Ukraine conflict ends that Russia will want to come back in the dollar system because, again...
So once Russia-Ukraine ends, do you actually think Putin's going to want to come back into the dollar system, the same dollar system that's sanctioning him now and all of his oligarchy-type buddies? You think they're going to want to still accept that currency? Yeah, okay, we'll see.
Yeah, the dollar is our liquidity, it's our capital markets, it's depth and breadth. Everyone wants to be here. I think many times...
Everybody wants to be a part of that, okay.
The great thing about the United States is we course correct when we go too far one way or the other.
You have to laugh at this, that's why I enjoy his videos.
Where we have advantages, and where we have advantages, share with our allies, and push back on those who are not aligned with us. Dollar dominance.
Act on those who are not aligned with us. And so this is where we get into the idea that the dollar is front center. Because of what Iran is doing by causing ruckus in the Strait of Hormuz, basically providing cover for the idea that those nation states are not willing to flow oil our way, the U.S. needs to now make sure they step up to be able to retrieve that same level of flow, i.e., well, we got Venezuela now. And so this leads to the next part of why, the transition away from the dollar-based price mechanisms is inevitable because of this here. So I just showed you how we're down to zero from Saudi Arabia last month. It will not be just a 1 month thing, in my opinion. It'll be gradually increasing, but nowhere near what it used to be.
We're already in
because the U.S. no longer needs it because the refiners find replacements in Venezuela. And so literally that same level of oil, that 800,000 barrels per day that was coming from Saudi Arabia is now being made up by the 600,000 barrels that's coming from Venezuela. And it's good to say that's going to increase. And so you lose one, you gain another. So you can still tout the idea that, the dollar is still strong. Oh, really? It's just that we won't have the privilege of directly putting as much pressure on the West or the Eastern Hemisphere, i.e. Saudi Arabia in particular. And that to me is a sign that, where will their loyalty lie if they're no longer dependent upon pricing their oil in USD terms. And so that leads to the next important point that goes right along with the idea that something has shifted when you have Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Turkey signing MECA, the MECA Pact for mutual defense. So here's the thing. All these Middle Eastern nations, who are their enemies? Other than just different factions, different ideologies, and different types of thought leadership amongst those Islamic nations. They're all Islamic, and they all believe that Allah, or their Mahdi, is coming soon. And so it's amazing that they can believe on the bigger picture, in a sense, but they can't come together and agree on the smaller details until you get the need to defend yourself from some boogeyman out there. And so all three of these nations are buddy-buddy with Russia, and Russia is supposed to be the enemy of humanity, according to the U.S., and they all have deals with China. And so who exactly are they going to defend themselves from? I know the answer, and I'm assuming you know the answer as well. And so when you have these type of arrangements being made behind closed doors, they're not talking about this MECA Pact on Fox right now. Neither are they talking about some of the things that's happening with the oil situation. And I haven't even heard anything about Iran. We're supposed to have a deal concluded right now. Am I not mistaken? And so what happened with that deal? So clearly gold and silver, and they probably even our bond interest rates have sniffed out the manure from the narrative that is coming from our leadership. And so let me share with you. So this is, when you see stuff like this is how you know that the world has changed. And the U.S. has yet to fully accept that fact.
Oh, that's Sergei Lavrov right there. No, that's Erdogan. Never mind. But either way, Russia's that new broker.
And then, of course, you got the Prince, MBS, signing.
Because those are BRICS members talking to each other, by the way.
Signing for their people. And so who are they defending themselves from? We're going to find out, because there is a article out here. it talks about
Greater Israel,
if you
right?
attack one of those nations, you attack all three. And who's the only nation out here that's really attacking people? Unfortunately. But they attack people, as I said, because of the defense of the dollar. And so expect more dollar dumping amongst these three nation states here. And as a way of reinforcing their actions, that's why they're signing this pact to defend themselves. And so let me see if this is it here. It says, no, this is not the one I want to talk about. But I came across an article talking about this, saying that an attack against one is an attack against all. And so the U.S. now is not going to have the same amount of allies as they had before, and they won't be able to outright defend or to.
Slovakia, something else got hit. Anyhow, so he's going to get into this, right? You know, and pretty much, though, there's a new dollar, right? You know, it's going to bring in a new digital dollar. That's what it's all ushering it in. The U.S. dollar is dead. The petrodollar is dead. So they have to usher in a new one. Now I'm going to get into Kim Iverson here. Slovakia.
Well, according to reports from the Washington Post, Trump threatened to fire Pete Hegseth over the loss of the war in Iran. This comes from the Washington Post. They say President Donald Trump's frustration over the Iran war boiled over at Camp David last week, where he demanded answers from Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth on why he had apparently been misled on extreme munition shortages that now threaten to limit military options with Iran.
So he acts like he didn't know about the shortages.
The encounter took place on the sidelines of his cabinet meeting at Camp David on Friday, where Trump vented at Hegseth that he thought the munitions issue had been fixed, according to both people familiar with the conversation, who, like others, spoke on the condition of anonymity due to fear of retaliation. So, of course, you know, they're speaking on with anonymity, and so Caroline Leavitt comes out and says, "This is not true. This is not true at all." She says, "I was at Camp David with President Trump and Secretary Hegseth. This literally never happened, and we told the Washington Post out repeatedly. This BS story was shocked to many outlets by someone clearly out to disparage the secretary for whatever reason. Unfortunately for them, the president loves the secretary and thinks he's doing a tremendous job." Fake news. Is it really fake news, though? Is it fake news? Because Trump also ended up tweeting this, where he basically says, "It's not true. Oh, but by the way, I'm going to throw you in jail for treason, for something that's not true." Really? I mean, this makes me think it's true. He says the U.S. has massive amounts of munitions, especially of certain types. Additionally, large amounts are being manufactured and shipped to the U.S. as needed. Defense companies are building the largest number of plants and factories in our country's history. The leakers of these treasonous statements are being hunted down. Long-term jail sentences will be sought. But you can't put people in jail for a long time for just telling fibs and lies. You can only put them in jail for treason if what they're saying is true. So it sounds to me like it's probably true that you've got now multiple people, not just the people at Camp David saying the president was mad about the munitions shortage, but you also have others who came out saying, yeah, we have a munitions problem. We have a real munitions problem.
And why would these countries need to actually create a defense pact? Because the U.S. ain't defending them at all. The U.S. is getting wiped out. They can't defend themselves. And those countries ain't looking to defend themselves against Iran. They're looking to defend themselves against the U.S. for U.S. retaliation. They know what the U.S. did to Iraq when Iraq wanted to trade in other currencies. So that's what it's all about, is currencies, just like we think of the dollar got into. Nonetheless, though, you know, it's true that the U.S. Can't even do shit about it. They've got their asses whooped, and they're out of munitions.
So you've got multiple people saying we have a munitions problem. And these people are deep within the government. They love war. All of them love war. These are not like anti-war activists suddenly surrounding President Trump and in the Pentagon. Give me a break. These people love war. So they're not, what would be the goal of them lying about this? The only goal I can see is to shut down the war, because you don't want people to go to war. So you say, we have a munitions problem. Oh, we can't fight the war anymore. Well, if you're somebody who wants war, which all of them do, then what would be your motivation for actually saying that? Because it's true, you don't want to end up with dead soldiers. And you realize, oh shit, we have a munitions problem. We don't want to have dead soldiers. So, you know, we've got to be careful about our next steps. Because you know that these people love war. So Trump's saying, this is not true, but you're all going to go to jail. What is this one here? He then says, oh, Pete Hegseth is great. Love Pete. He says, the fake news, as usual, is spreading false and completely unfounded rumors. I'm extremely happy with the job that Pete Hegseth is doing. Everything has been extraordinary, including our attack on Venezuela, where the result was accomplished in less than 1 day, allowing us to bring one of the worst criminals anywhere in the world, Nicolas Maduro, to justice. Likewise, Iran, where the country has been decimated for the purpose of not allowing it to ever have a nuclear weapon, is going very well. Pete is highly respected within the military and has made tremendous improvements, including getting rid of DEI and increasing recruitment to historic levels. This rumor was started by the Washington Post, one of the worst media outlets in the business, despite our telling them their story is completely false. In actuality, I really believe their fake reporting is treasonous. President Donald J. Trump. The only one committing treason, by the way, is you, by siding with the Israelis and doing the Israelis' bidding and getting Americans killed. So if there's any traitors running around Washington, it's the traitors that are unfortunately infiltrating the White House and Congress. So, I mean, I think the reports are true, and these guys are screwed, and they're screaming, and they don't want the Iranians to know the truth. So, of course, what are they going to say? All right, yesterday, the U.S. lifted sanctions on the IRGC-linked airline, signaling U.S. efforts to facilitate a deal that could lead to broader nuclear talks. Okay, let's see what this is. This is from Shael. He says the leaks coming out from talks on Hormuz are incredible. It appears the U.S. is willing to make massive concessions on control of the Strait of Hormuz. It will try to keep plausible deniability by not signing anything and keeping it as a deal between Iran and Oman. So, number one, a Gulf source told Reuters the concession has already been made regarding some form of control over Hormuz, but how control is defined is still being discussed. This means the pre-war status quo will not be restored. Iran will have some sort of primacy over the strait. Number two, it appears one mechanism would be split lanes where ships enter the Persian Gulf through an Iranian-controlled lane and exit through an Omani-controlled one. Three, a registration system logging every entry and exit, which Iran believes lets it impose full control over shipping. Number four, Iran is insisting on service fees would be collected from vessels transiting the lanes. If the U.S. accepts this, it would be a massive reversal. Trump said publicly on August 4th there won't be charging. Number five, the U.S. has already made concessions to smooth this over. Sanctions were just lifted on 2 aircraft and 3 airlines tied to the IRGC. It looks like this will be another MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, this time more favorable to Iran. The last one was really favorable to Iran. How could it be more favorable? This time more favorable to Iran, paving the way to nuclear talks. If any of this is true and Trump agrees to it, the U.S. is on the ropes. So we're also getting that reporting. So we're getting reporting that we run out of munitions. We're getting reporting that Trump is mad at Pete Hegseth at Camp David. The White House is denying it, right? Okay, but then we're getting other reports that the U.S. is basically caving to Iran and going into another MOU. So, I mean, you do the math there. Sounds like the reporting of us not having munitions is true.
Yep, and like everything else, though, their narrative is falling apart, and they hate that. And that's why it's threatening to jail people. Winter is coming. Europe faces twin diesel and nat gas crunch. Yeah, because, what is it? During the Biden administration, totally made them dependent upon the U.S., and the U.S. ain't got shit left. Samantha Dart, co-head of global commodities research at Goldman Sachs, began the week by telling Bloomberg TV the global diesel supply crunch is what keeps her up at night. She followed up Wednesday with a client note warning that European natural gas storage levels are also lagging the seasonal average ahead of the winter heating period. So people ain't going to have enough to heat their homes. I guess they'll freeze to death because, hey, they're saving the environment. It's hilarious. But here's the headline, right? U.S. imports of Saudi crude oil fall to zero for the first time since 1985 amid the Iran conflict, as rethinking the dollar was getting into, right? Salaki, I got to close this one out. The U.S. imports of Saudi crude oil fell to zero in July for the first time in a full month since 1985, according to preliminary data from the U.S. Department of Energy. And we saw all that on Rethinking the Dollar. But, this is what's going on. All this is happening at the same time. We want them too. Trump rebuffs Zelensky's request for missiles. So guess what? Zelensky ain't getting any fucking missiles. U.S. President earlier denied multiple reports of shortages caused by his war against Iran. U.S. President Trump dismissed Ukraine's plea for more Patriot anti-air missiles following widespread reports that interceptor stockpiles have been significantly depleted since the war began. Zelensky has warned that Ukraine is running out of Western supplied interceptors to fend off Russia's strikes. So like everything else, and you heard Vladimir Putin say that if he wanted Kiev, he could have them in 2 weeks. But the U.S. keeps supplying them, so that's the only reason it hasn't. But, and here's that deal as spoken of, right? Saudi Arabia, Pakistan. I don't know if Pakistan is one of those BRICS nations. I think that they are, but we know that Turkey and Saudi Arabia are. They signed trilateral defense pact. This pact comes as the U.S.-Israeli war against Iran raises doubt about D.C.'s long-term security guarantees. So, they want to build their own defenses, right? In order to fight off anything, right? AKA, the Israeli state is like going and stealing countries, but then again, not just the Israeli state, the U.S., because what did they do? When Saddam wanted to trade in other currencies, they bombed the shit out of them. And then did the same to Libya. They overthrew both Muammar Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein for the same thing because they wanted to trade outside the dollar. So this war is getting bigger. Saudi Arabia warns of imminent attacks by Iraqi groups and Yemen's Houthis. Well, you started a war with the Iraqi groups, so since they're going to get the blame for it, right? Warning followed deadly Saudi and U.S. strikes against popular mobilization positions in Iraq last month. Well, you bombed them. You wanted a war, and you're going to get a war. Saudi Arabia warned that the Iraqi armed groups and Yemen's Houthis could soon launch coordinated attacks against the kingdom. Senior Saudi officials speaking anonymously to Reuters on Thursday said intelligence gathered by Saudi Arabia, the U.S., and other countries in the region indicated civilian and economic sites could be targeted. Yeah, they'll blow the shit out of your fucking oil and you'll have nothing. Trump threatens leakers with jail time over reports about munition shortages, and you already caught that on Kim Iverson, right? So, just throw him in jail for reporting on it, right? So we got all that. Yeah. And here we go. And he's going to get into the same thing. They fucking leaked it this time. So, like everything else, though, well, he's falling on his face and people are calling him out for it. And, yep. It's out there that the U.S. can't do anything, and he's nothing more than a paper tiger, right? It's fucking hilarious, his reactions.
Oh boy, things are getting a little strange, especially with American foreign policy. As first, it's a little convoluted, it's a little complicated, as right now we are talking about using massive amounts of escalatory force in order to make sure that Iran opens up the Strait of Hormuz, and Iran is not playing ball. As we're getting a lot of conflicting statements that Donald Trump is playing defense on. It's never good when in the PR battles you're having to defend. A lot of the news reports that are coming out right now highlighting how allegedly Trump was fighting with the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, and how there are significant military missile stockpile shortages that are making us very vulnerable. Is that really what's going on here? According to Trump, no, as Alex Jones came out and said that the possibility of Trump using nukes just escalated significantly. And there is some circumstantial evidence, especially with NBC News literally talking about how the Pentagon is drafting up plans on how to use nukes. Like, this was a crazy topic that everyone was like, yeah, whatever, yeah, sure. I've been talking about it for 15 years since it's one of the existential threats against humanity, and it looks like we're getting closer there. We're going to talk about that as well as all of the latest comments, all of the latest analysis, all here on this independent media broadcast. If you appreciate that, subscribe. Click the notification button. We greatly appreciate all the time that you guys spend with us, as right now we're getting multiple conflicting reports, especially from this administration, telling us that Iran is signaling that a deal is close. And we've heard that one before. We've heard that one a lot. We've heard that we've won this war. We've heard the deal's done. We heard the strait's open. And it hasn't been. It hasn't been in a long time, which is concerning for the global economy that the Iranian theater of conflict is playing out in, as they are deciding to show the world that they are going to create pain and suffering financially for everyone. With now their trade route that they are going to try to enrich themselves through. As in the making of this video, we are hearing that Iran was engaging in hostilities, attacking alleged hostile targets in the Strait of Hormuz just minutes ago, as there are some reports that the targets were oil tankers that were going through the Strait of Hormuz through the U.S.-backed corridor under U.S. supervision. Now, again, we can't confirm a lot of these reports. A lot of the reporting when it comes to this conflict have been very unbelievable, mainly because it's war, and countries lie throughout war. There's also some people detailing how the list of injured and the list of American casualties is a lot higher than it actually is. There's been denial of satellite imagery, and it's very hard to kind of ascertain the true kind of scope of this conflict, but clearly this has gone on far longer than was promised to go on for, and it looks like there's no end in sight here, as the Iranians are talking about one provision about a new potential deal being that Bibi and the United States will no longer have access to the Strait of Hormuz, even with countries that they are trading with, as Iran wants to permanently ban Bibi's country and the United States and all other, quote, hostile vessels from transiting through the Strait of Hormuz with fines of up to 20% of cargo value for violations, both military and, quote, civilian, according to the Iranian parliament now that is reviewing a draft bill that is also expected to be a part of an Oman-Iran agreement once finalized here. It looks like Iran is coming out and saying, look, we can't trust you. You guys make peace deals, and then you guys don't hold up your end to the bargain. There's fighting happening in Lebanon that Bibi's conducting. Trump asked Bibi to stop. Bibi didn't stop. As now there are alleged reports of Trump and Pete Hegseth fighting with each other at Camp David over missile depletion concerns here, as there are anonymous reports coming in right now highlighting how Donald Trump was pissed at the defense secretary over extreme munition shortages. Now, this adds up, especially with what Zelensky was telling us, but Donald Trump is denying this on Truth Social, saying the fake news, as usual, is spreading false and completely unfounded rumors. Again, listen, Trump's rhetoric throughout all of this hasn't been perfect either, right? It's like, we won, it's over. It's like, okay, it's like Groundhog's Day. It hasn't been over, as he says that he is extremely happy with the job that Pete Hegseth is doing. So far, again, this war, according to a lot of the sources, was sold to Trump as a quick and easy victory, and it hasn't been quick, it hasn't been easy, and there are now a lot of concerns about our defensive capabilities. We took Patriot missile systems out of Korea. We took We asked Poland to take Patriot missile systems out of Poland when the United States was also telling Poland that Russia could soon attack Poland. And then Poland gave Ukraine some of their missiles, Patriot missile systems. Ukraine's asking for more missiles now, and Ukraine seems to be very frustrated that there's not missiles. As Trump says, everything has been extraordinary, including our attack on Venezuela. Okay, we're not talking about Venezuela. We're talking about Iran now. We've been striking Iran for a very long time. What do we have to show for it? I mean, we've warned that this was going to happen before getting into any of that and a lot more. And Alex Jones talking about the risk of a nuclear war here. Really quickly, check out Take Calm.
Yep. And like everything else, though, we know it is going to be a nuclear war. There's no doubt about it. But wait, there's more, right? You know, because, you know, they're going after reporting. But guess what? There's new censorship bills in Canada, as this video goes into, right? So let's get into
This is Dan Dix here reporting for Press for Truth, and for those of you who have been paying close attention to the political climate here in Canada, you probably noticed that it's vastly and rapidly changing at an incredible rate. We seem to be getting bombarded right now with a number of bills that are attacking our free speech and amount to nothing less than censorship, whether that be with Bill C-8, the cybersecurity bill, Bill C-9, the so-called Combating Hate Act, or Bill C-22,
then you just heard that Trump's going to arrest those
we seem to be
reporting,
getting hit
right?
with these almost every other week. It's almost becoming hard to keep up with them all. But thankfully, we do have an expert here to break this all down for us. So joining us on the line right now is John Carpe. He is the founder and president of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. John, thank you so much for joining us here today. I'd love to get your thoughts on how Canadians can mitigate Big Brother in their lives moving forward as we see more and more censorship coming down the pipe. But before we get into that, maybe you can just kind of break down some of these bills for us and talk about some of the current cases going on as well that are having to deal with some of this stuff. So what would you say are some of the more troubling aspects that you've seen in some of these bills we've mentioned, like C-8 and C-9, that have already reached royal assent, and C-22 that's on its way to the Senate?
Yeah, I'm glad to be with you and your viewers and listeners. I appreciate the invitation, even though the subject matter is grim and depressing, but we have to take a hard look at reality first and understand it before we get into a situation of being able to do anything about it. So we've got about a half dozen bills over the last 3 years. There are more and more of them coming more recently, but what the direction Canada is heading in right now is the creation of a surveillance state where the government will know everything about you and have all that information in one place. And it started 3 years ago with the Bill C-11, the Online Streaming Act, which gave the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission, the CRTC, acquired new authority over online streaming. Previously, it was just radio and television. So that was a big step in the wrong direction. We got the Online News Act, which was then C-18, which made it impossible for Canadians to share news stories on Facebook and Instagram.
Very similar to the UK,
C-8, the
isn't it?
Cybersecurity Act, which you referenced, which gives individual federal cabinet ministers the power to kick Canadians off the internet by ordering providers to no longer provide services to you. They can also include in their order that the order must be kept secret, so you can't talk to anybody about it. And the government refused amendments to the bill that would have clarified that it will never be used against somebody based on what they said or what opinion they expressed. And they refused to make that amendment. They said, well, don't worry. It'll never be abused, as if our bank accounts had not been frozen. And it'll never be abused. It's only going to be about cybersecurity. Well, we don't have assurance that it's not going to be a censorship tool to kick a provocative or outspoken Canadian off the internet. We got Bill C-9, the Combating Hate Act, which opens the door to the potential for Catholic priests, evangelical pastors, Orthodox Jewish rabbis getting criminally prosecuted for teaching what their sacred scriptures say about homosexuality and transgenderism and human sexuality and marriage, so on and so forth.
You mean
mentioned
faggot
the
shit.
Lawful Access Act, Bill C-22, which requires that telecom companies keep your private personal data on file for 6 months. So this is every text you sent, every email you sent, every phone call that you made or accepted. The law does not allow them to read the texts or to listen into the calls, but there are records there that will indicate who you texted and how many times and when, and they can easily figure out your geographical location. So it's a massive information grab by the state by forcing private companies to do this. There's a communications company you've probably heard of called Signal. They have publicly announced that they are leaving Canada if Bill C-22, now before the Senate, is passed into law. They say we can no longer guarantee the privacy of our own customers and protect the confidentiality of their communications. So if Bill C-22 is passed, they're going to leave Canada, and Canadians will no longer be able to use Signal. That's a very strong indication of, you don't typically hear about, companies mostly are apolitical, and if a company says they're going to have to leave Canada because their privacy guarantees will be in violation of the Lawful Access Act. So last but not least, and I know it's a lot here, but now we've got the Safe Social Media Act. Bill C-34 was introduced into first reading in the House of Commons, and maybe I'll pause for a minute if you've got questions or comments before I dive into this
Well,
Bill C-34?
Yeah, sure. I mean, just the fact that companies like Signal are taking these massive steps says a lot, because I think, a lot of companies and people have known that this was going on. Like, we had the Edward Snowden revelation of, the Prism, a long time ago saying that this is happening, but now they're putting pen to paper. They're actually trying to get this to become law, to reach royal assent in Canada so that they can, come down with the strong hand of the law. They've done this usually under the guise of protecting the children, but we know that that's just a cover for their censorship. And it seems like a lot of the times the accusation of hateful content or hate is really just talking about things that are being offensive to people, right? Like, do they not seem like they're more like the feelings police these days instead of going after actual crimes?
Yeah, so just this morning, the Justice Centre sent out a tweet pointing to the Edmonton police inviting complaints about offensive jokes. You can believe that. And they call this a non-criminal action. And then, you and I and everybody else, probably over the course of a day or over the course of the week, we do things that, don't meet our own high standards, that are non-criminal. I mean, how many non-criminal actions are there? Police have limited resources. If they're not able to solve all of the murders and go after all of the impaired drivers and thieves and vandals, if you report vandalism to the police, very often they'll take note of it, and they know it's maybe for insurance purposes, but they don't have the resources to even try to find out who it was that vandalized your car or other property.
Yep, and like everything else, though, you just, have to cut your losses when it happens. I mean, you could have just bought something and then somebody just fucking stole it from you. I mean, how many times did you go through that as a kid, right? Another fucking Edomite kid fucking steals from you, right? And you fucking lost it, and you just have to cut your losses because they're not going to do anything about it anyways, right? Or you fucking kick his ass and then you're the one that's in trouble, right? Well, this is what this Edomite does all the time, so like everything else, though, that's ushering in a famine of the word. GMS Toronto is in Canada, obviously, right? Toronto's one of the bigger cities in Canada, so, it really affects them. So that's already the beginning of a famine when it directly affects us being able to put up videos, and definitely it's going on in the UK, and they're looking to bring it into Europe. So like everything else, so Iran's tired of all this stupid bullshit. They're tired of Trump saying that there's a deal. There is no fucking deal. It's like, come on, let's bring it. Let's go, you fucking pussy. That's all you do is fucking talk. Enough with the theater diplomacy, Iran's top negotiator Trump. U.S. president will gain nothing from bullying, broken promises, and fake news, Mohammed Ghalib has said. U.S. President Trump should curb his theater diplomacy as it will not work with Iran. Iran's top negotiator said. Trump announced on Saturday that he called off the planned attack against Iran, which according to him would have been on a scale not seen since World War II. Of course, we're talking about last Saturday because we're already at Saturday now, right? But like everything else, though, enough the talking. If you're going to strike, strike. Otherwise, don't waste our time. IRGC strikes hostile targets in Hormuz as Iran declares a Oman deal and bans U.S. vessels from the Strait. So pretty much the U.S. and the Israeli state, any of their interest is totally banned for the Strait. We knew this was coming because like everything else, though, they would not stop their attacks. So guess what? The U.S., their desolations are with them, right? Just like the prophecy says. And eventually this will go nuclear, but for right now, all their resources is cut off. Explosions heard near Qusam Island. Iran struck hostile targets. Iran's parliament reviews draft Hormuz plan banning U.S. and Israeli-linked vessels. Oil rises. Houthis intensify attacks against Saudi oil shipping in the Red Sea. So you got two straits that are pretty much closed down. Yemen fighting escalates amid reports of major casualties. Iran-Oman talks continue. U.S. as U.S. backs diplomatic solution searches for off-ramp. But like everything else, it's all political theater. U.S. redeploys its forces in Erbil ahead of Iraqi withdrawal. So Iran is the one that's going to fucking get them out of there. So they're removing them, probably moving them back into Saudi Arabia. U.S. forces shift troops and air defenses around Erbil as D.C. prepares to complete its Iraqi withdrawal amid renewed regional tensions. Yeah, tensions that they started. So like everything else, so they have no choice but to retreat, U.S. terrorists have begun large-scale overnight redeployment around Erbil as D.C. prepares to complete its military withdrawal from Iraq. Reported movements involve personnel and equipment being transferred between Haya Air Base, Erbil National Airport, and U.S. Consulate compound, in what sources describe as preparations for the withdrawal of the remaining U.S. terrorists under a September 2024 agreement between D.C. and Baghdad. The operations come days after Iraqi authorities foiled an attempted drone attack targeting the U.S. consulate in Erbil. So like everything else, I don't know why they would protect the U.S., but probably under pressure, but also, the U.S. to willfully withdraw. So that way Iraq doesn't keep getting attacked. They don't want to be drawn into this conflict, but they're forcibly getting drawn in. Ansar Allah launches attacks targeting Saudi-backed forces in central Yemen. The war is on. Ansar Allah, also known as the Houthis, launched significant strikes on Thursday targeting military camps in central Yemen belonging to the emergency forces, anti-Houthi force recently created by Saudi Arabia that operates under the command of the Saudi military. So this has escalated since then, and like everything else, everybody's fighting. This is the third world coming quickly. 8 wounded overnight as Israeli state escalates its attacks, its airstrikes since the highest rate in June. While the U.S. brokered Lebanon-Israeli talks didn't actually wrap up until Tuesday, Israeli state was already scaling back the war. Bullshit! They ain't scaling back nothing. On Wednesday, Israeli state fired 113 projectiles into Lebanon, most strikes launched in a single day since mid-June. 1 person was killed and 11 wounded in a daytime attack on Teban, and the attacks continued into the night. So, like everything else, Israeli state doing whatever the fuck it wants to, right? At least the flock drawing them out. I'm going to make their habitations desolate with them, right? Because that's what these words are speaking. As you see a family of the word coming in under censorship, and just in both Canada and over here, because Trump is threatening to arrest those that leaked the story about the munition piles being low, and of course about Hegseth and him arguing. So we know the petrodollar is dead, as you know it, now down to zero, because both straits being closed, and the U.S. can't buy any more oil whatsoever. You leave in Venezuela there to take some of it, but like everything else, even that, the disruptions are already there. It doesn't have the hegemony power it once yielded. So everything's being reshaped, and it's all because Trump does exactly what King Bibi says, and it's because the Most High is directing him. The Most High is the one behind all of this. He's your main tactician there. And he's getting everything ready for the final battle, the Battle of Armageddon, the mountain of troops where Esau tries to fight Yahweh Shai and the angels. He's preparing the battle. So hopefully this has all been edifying as I close this out, with these final verses. Jeremiah chapter 49 verse 20. Therefore hear the counsel of the Most High that is taken against Edom, and his purposes that he has purposed against the inhabitants of Teman. Surely the least the flock shall draw them out. Surely he shall make their dwelling places desolate with them. And that's talking about the small hats, the Amalekites, those Israelis. The earth shakes at the noise of their fall, at the cry. Its noise is heard at the Red Sea. So like everything else, a huge battle's coming. Multitudes in the Valley of Decision. The day of the Lord Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai is in the Valley of Decision. Reiterating that in this. Behold, he shall come up and fly like the eagle and spread his wings over Basra, which is now the key word for America. The heart of the mighty men of Edom in that day shall be like the heart of a woman in birth pains. They've never seen retaliation like this. They've never seen their cities filled with missiles and just no defenses whatsoever because their munitions have been depleted. That day of judgment is coming. So hopefully this has all been edifying. For that I want to say Baraka the Yahweh, Baraka the Yahweh Shai, Hashem Rakakadash, Wa Abab Babal. Brakatum, Jehovah elect, Salakia, that I had to put this in 2 parts, but as you know, sometimes, you know, you just, you've gone on for too long, or just, it took longer than what you thought. But guess what, though? That's all part of the Spirit moving. Shalom.